Hey guys, I'm Andrea Dunlop. So today I'm filming the first in a series of videos that I'm going to be doing about book publishing, race, and representation. So the last few videos I've talked more about some great books that are coming out by Black authors, kind of what we can do to support Black authors in our community in the really immediate term and going forward. But I want to kind of delve into some of these issues that are happening a bit further upstream, that are systemic, and that are going to take a bit more time to change. So I am a person who is deeply invested in this industry on many levels. I'm a former industry professional. I worked as a publicist for a Big Five house. I've worked as a freelancer. I'm an author. I'm obviously a passionate reader. So I'm really invested in this industry changing for the better. But I do want to say at the top of this series that it's really important that this conversation be led by BIPOC publishing professionals and authors, and that this conversation happen on their terms, not mine. But what I'm hoping to do in these videos is really just kind of unpack some of the systemic issues, go through some of the existing information that we have, and hopefully, uplift some of the voices of some amazing folks who are really advocating for change. And during this series, I'm going to be pointing you in the direction of some of those folks as sources. But I do think that my perspective, hopefully, as a person who's worked on several sides of this issue, can be helpful as a guide. And I also do think that we frequently put way too much onus on the small number of BIPOC folks who are in the industry to come up with solutions and to kind of educate everyone else. So hopefully I can be helpful by doing some of the lifting here. Okay, so what does book publishing look like in terms of race and diversity? So there are two surveys that people point to most frequently when this topic comes up. The first is Publishers Weekly's annual salary report, which also asks folks questions about race and gender. So that is a relatively small sample size, I should point out. In 2019, they had 699 respondents. According to them, these are the numbers. And I should just mention at the top that these race categories are defined by the survey takers, not defined by me. So according to Publishers Weekly salary survey in 2019, publishing is 84% white, 5% Asian, 4% mixed race, 3% Hispanic, 2% Black, and 2% who identified as others. So a larger survey that's also frequently cited is one taken by multicultural children's publisher Lee and Low. So they did what they call a diversity baseline study. They did the first one in 2015, and they did another one in 2019. So they have gotten a lot more respondents to the survey. In 2015, they had 3,700, and in 2019, they had 7,893 respondents. So according to Lee and Low, the numbers are a tiny bit better. 76% white, 7% Asian Pacific Islander, 6% Latinx, 5% Black, Afro-American, Afro-Caribbean, 3% bi-multiracial, and less than 1% American Indian, Alaskan Native, less than 1% Middle Eastern, and 1% other. So the bottom line here is, according to the numbers, publishing is extremely white. Now, this was kind of something that everyone knew anecdotally just from looking around at publishing houses, but these numbers definitely have underscored that. So a couple of other interesting things to note from the Lee and Low survey in 2019, which again, I kind of feel like because of the bigger sample size gives us more accurate numbers, is that editorial is actually getting more white. Between 2015 and 2019, it went from 82% white in editorial to 85%. Now, editorial for me is of particular interest because these are the folks who acquire the books at the house. So they sort of have the most say over which books get published, in my opinion, and I'm going to kind of get into the meat of that in my next video and into that process and how it works right now. An interesting sort of positive note from the Lee and Low survey in 2019 is that interns were much more diverse. Of the interns who responded to the survey, about 49% identified as BIPOC. So that definitely suggests that some efforts are being made, have been made between the 2015 and 2019 surveys to bring new folks into the fold. But as I'll get into later, burnout and retention are still huge issues. Okay, so what is the impact of all of this? Obviously, these numbers matter a lot for industry folks in just terms of making our industry more equitable. And yes, there is a thriving indie book publishing industry in 2020, but still, the majority of folks that are seen as sort of gatekeepers for this industry that decide which books really get widely read are happening, within that traditional trade publishing. So these folks have a lot of say over which books sort of make their way into the wider culture and which books are big books. When you look at books that are getting things like Oprah's book club pick, Reese Witherspoon book club pick, getting made into movies, etc. They're really all coming from this group of people working in trade publishing houses. And so, as we all know, as authors and readers, books have a huge impact on the culture. They have a huge impact on how we see certain groups of people, on how we look at each other, on how we, the lens through which we see things. And so it really matters that book publishing as an industry looks representative of the country that it's in. So that will help us understand one another better. I strongly believe that books have the ability to do that. And it also matters a great deal that we have a representative publishing staff to keep harmful narratives from making their way into the culture. If you want to see a recent example of where this went pretty awry, just go ahead and look up the American Dirt controversy that happened earlier this year. Okay, so obviously these numbers are nothing to feel good about industry-wise right now, but I do actually feel hopeful about this being the moment for change. We've had this hard data for a while. It's frustrating that more movement hasn't happened, but I do think right now there is a huge demand for accountability from companies in all industries to make a plan to make things better going forward, with hard numbers, really solid concrete plans attached. And I think that the dual instance of this demand that's sort of brought on by the momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement, coupled with COVID-19 happening this year and forcing everyone to work from home for a long period of time, could really move us forward. Because one of the most persistent reasons given for why publishing isn't more diverse is that publishing professionals have to live in New York City, which is a super expensive city. So I think that this year has sort of demolished that myth that people need to be working all in the same place, in an office building to be effective at their job. So I'm very hopeful that that right now is a moment that we could see a big shift. So, listen, I loved my time in book publishing, but if you've ever wondered why, rich white folks from the East Coast seem a little overrepresented in novels, that's why, because that's what the industry looks like. You couldn't swing a cat in that place without hitting an Ivy Leaguer. So, I think anybody who's invested in this industry, as I am, should want it to get better, should want there to be a more level playing field. So, I believe that we can do it. Come on, guys, let's push it forward. Okay, so next up in part 2, I'm going to be talking about kind of some of the thorny issues around comp titles and race. And kind of getting into the editorial process of it all. So I just want to close this video by saying that I really, really welcome your feedback, and as I said, I'm trying to help by unpacking some of these issues and kind of looking at some of these numbers that we have. I think it's really unfair to expect BIPOC, folks to do all of the work, even though, again, I really think we should be listening to them and letting them lead. I'm just trying to kind of gather up some of the information here and give it context from my industry experience, but I absolutely recognize that my perspective is going to be limited, and I really, really welcome your feedback. So I will see you next time.